Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to topic 3. And after the Easter weekend and everything, it's been quite a lot of holiday time, but now we're back in business. Topic 3 is underway. And the topic is learning in communities and networking, which in a way is what this course is all about. And to introduce this topic, we have a former ONL participant who's been a co-facilitator, and you've been and now a contributor, Kay Oddone from the other side of the world. Hi.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Alistair, and thank you everyone for having me. I am here in Brisbane, Australia. So it's we're heading into winter. It's finally starting to cool down, which is lovely. It's only about 26 degrees each day now, which is really nice and pleasant after our summer. And it'll probably get down to about 2018 in the height of winter. So nothing like what some other people might be experiencing during your winter, but I know you're heading into summer soon, so that'll be nice for you. And I'm really happy to be here once again with Alistair and to meet you all and to discuss learning in communities and networks. And oh yes, perfect time for pumpkin soup. Absolutely, thank you. And today, I think I'd like to start off by just referring to the scenario that you will be looking at in your groups for this particular topic. And it's really interesting to me because when I first started with ONL, the first round that I participated in, it was 2016. And that time has gone so fast, but things have changed so drastically and so dramatically since I first participated in this course, and since I started co-presenting and presenting with Alistair on this topic, things continue to change. But I think we always knew that they would change because technology is always changing and evolving, and the way we work and the way we learn always continues to change and evolve. But since we've had the pandemic, things have just massively changed in ways that I don't think any of us could have expected. And so I think tonight it will be really interesting to talk about networks and learning collaboratively and learning in communities, but also to see how we might look at changing the ways that we work with students and the ways that we work with our colleagues to suit this changed environment that we're now in. So the scenario is about designing a learning opportunity that encourages students to work together collaboratively, but also builds their capacity for collaboration. When we first posed this, I think we were probably talking about working together on a project for an assessment task and things like that in a face-to-face setting. But now more than ever, we are increasingly doing all of the same things that we used to do face-to-face, but doing them online. And whether or not we follow the same patterns and the same pedagogies as we used to, or whether we come up with new ways of doing things, is what I think is really interesting and something that would be really useful to discuss tonight and through the course. So basically, the aim of participating in this webinar is to help you become more familiar with the advantages and challenges of social learning and learning in communities and learning communities. To introduce perhaps to some of you, or some of you may already be familiar with the concept of a personal learning network, which is an area that I have researched, to become aware of the potentials that exist and also the pitfalls for network collaborative learning, particularly in socially mediated digital spaces. So these types of spaces that we seem to exist in now, even more so than we could have possibly thought before. And even now that the pandemic, I don't know about what it's like wherever you are, but here in Australia, in Brisbane, we still have about 5,000 cases a day of COVID. But because we've got really high vaccination rates, we don't have to wear masks. We don't have to check in anywhere. Life is sort of back to normal, even though we have such high rates of transmission still. And although life has gone back to normal in some ways and students are going back to universities and into lecture theatres and things, it doesn't feel like it's the same. And it feels like there is a lot more awareness now of what we can do online and in these socially mediated spaces that are digital. And also, hopefully, you'll have some ideas about how you might respond to that scenario that we talked about. So just a little bit about me before we get too much further. That's my dog, Ruby. She's actually, I took that photo a couple of years ago now when I was in Singapore. I did move to Singapore. I intended on living in Singapore for a long time, a reasonable amount of time. But unfortunately, I moved over in January 2020. And once COVID hit, things changed like they did for a lot of people. And so I did spend most of 2020 in Singapore, and there's Ruby on the banks of one of the reservoirs there. But I ended up coming back to Australia, and yeah, the Singapore dream ended, maybe temporarily, maybe for a long time, who knows. So I am an educator. I started off my career in primary school, teaching grade 1. I was the teacher. I didn't start my career in primary school. I was the teacher teaching grade 1, and then I moved through to become a teacher librarian. I finished my PhD in 2019, and now I'm the lecturer and course director for the Master of Education Teacher Librarianship at Sturt University. And this course is completely online, and it's remotely delivered because it's always been a remote course. I actually completed the course myself, the Master of Education Teacher Librarianship, back in the early 2000s. I think it was like 2004 to 2006. And it was via distance then, but it was sending parcels of readings via the post. And I would read the readings that they were posted out to me. I would write my assignment and I would post it back to the university. Someone would mark it and I'd get a result. And that was it. I didn't have any sort of interaction with other students. I didn't have any sort of interaction with the lecturer apart from the comment that they may or may not have made on my assignment. But it was a distance education course. Now that as the course director, it's a completely different scenario. We have online lectures and online meetings with the students. We have discussion forums. I email and discuss things with students on a day-to-day basis. I would almost think that we've got 500 students completing the course at the moment, and I've got 100 in my particular subject that I'm teaching this session, which is Introduction to Teacher Librarianship. And I feel like I know those 100 students better in this sort of online distance learning scenario than I would if I was at the front of the lecture theatre or the classroom, because there's so many different channels through which we can communicate. So when we have our online meetings that are a bit like this, a bit like a webinar where we jump on Zoom and I have slides and we talk about concepts and we have discussions, the students will ask questions and we'll share experiences and professional stories and things like that. On the forums, they have a different type of interaction because they're interacting more with each other and they're sharing their responses to different prompts and different activities and commenting on each other's posts on the forums. And then via email, oftentimes we'll have much more personal discussions. So if a student's struggling with a particular topic, or if they're having a particular issue at home and they're struggling with their workload and things like that, we'll have that discussion in a much more personal sort of one-to-one sort of scenario. So there's a lot of different ways that I can work with the students. And then on the other side, the students have created a number of different study groups, and they've done that by themselves, and they do it depending on what they need and where they are. So all of the students, I'll just go on to this slide here. This is obviously, you'll all probably recognise the map of Australia, but Brisbane up here in Queensland is where I live, and the campus where the course is offered from is in Wagga Wagga which is in New South Wales, it's almost in the ACT next to Canberra. I just say there, it's about 1,200 kilometres from Brisbane. I've never been to Wagga Wagga, even though I completed my master's degree there all those years ago, and now I'm lecturing there. I am actually most likely going to go there in late May for my first face-to-face meeting with staff, but most of the students don't live in Wagga or anywhere near there either, because this unfortunately is the only university, basically, I think, in the Southern Hemisphere, at least I know definitely in Australia, that offers a qualification that allows you to become a teacher librarian. So we're the only course in all of Australia. So basically, if you want to become a teacher librarian, you might know them as school librarians. They work in primary schools, elementary schools, secondary schools, high schools, in the libraries as a librarian, but they're also qualified as teachers. So hence the name teacher librarian. In America, they're usually known as school librarians or media specialists. They've got different names everywhere. But if you want to become one of them, basically, and you live in Australia, you have to study our course here through the university at Wagga Wagga. The libraries do have books. Is it Luciana? The libraries do have books in the schools, although they have an increasing number of digital resources as well. Our library at the university has a mix of physical books and digital resources, and the library does post physical books out to students if they really want that particular resource and it can't be delivered digitally. But for the most part, the resourcing is all done digitally for the master's course. So basically, the students don't live in Wagga Wagga. I don't live in Wagga Wagga. Somehow the university building is in Wagga Wagga, and that's where we offer the course from, even though I'm writing subjects living here, and I'm, you know, it's a very different scenario. So how we work, oh, that's right. I was talking about how the students have their own little learning communities. So we have all these formalized ways of communicating through the university between me and the students, and between the students to talk with each other. Yes, it is similar to Athabasca, yes. And similar sort of country as well, like the size of the land mass. But the students have initiated their own study groups. So on the forum space, they have posted, and some people have said, look, I live in Sydney, or I live in Adelaide. Is there anyone who lives around this area who would like to meet for a face-to-face study group? And sometimes there's 2 or 3 or 4 of them that happen to live somewhat nearby, and they meet up for a face-to-face study group. But others have said, look, I know I live somewhere in the Northern Territory or somewhere where they're nowhere near anyone else. Or alternatively, I don't have time to meet with anyone face-to-face, but they've initiated Discord groups where they work with each other and have study meetups on Discord. So so that's really interesting. So I'm wondering whether in your experience you have been able to see the way that learning has morphed and changed for your students, or even for yourself, since we've started moving more online, and whether or not you can identify learning experiences like that, different channels and different scenarios for learning. If you would like to share in the chat, that would be a really great way to get our session moving. Anyone got any examples, or all is done to move online? Yeah, I think there'll always be a time and a space for face-to-face learning. Is that your experience, Luciana, that everything is now online, or is there still some face-to-face where you are?
No, I am a in-person class, a supporter of in-person class.
But you're sad that people are moving online?
Yes, exactly. Because I think that we are overdoing with this online tool technology. It seems to me like, okay, we have the technologies. This is great that I can listen to you from Australia. This is just great, but it's too much to move everything online, because I'm an old style person. I like very much the real contact.
Yes,
because we are reducing the human being to two senses, the ear and view. What about the smell, the touch, and the taste?
Yes. Yeah, you're right. It is very difficult to have those other senses appealed to when we're learning online. And it's certainly not something that I hope that replaces face-to-face learning completely. It's interesting. Some people are saying that hybrid is coming around a bit more now, that students want to meet with their classmates and the teachers face-to-face, but that others are meeting online, maybe because we have students joining us from all of Asia now. So I guess it's finding that balance, really, isn't it? It's finding that opportunity to meet face-to-face and learn, have that face-to-face experience, but also taking advantage of the fact that we can now connect with people, you know, far away from us, and that we can access. Someone has said, yeah, accessibility is important. Accessibility is interesting because in some ways online suits a wider range of learners, because although they are missing on some of those senses, like Luciana was saying, in other ways, because you can have a recording of the video that has a transcript and things like that, it might open up other opportunities. Lots of people saying that students have used WhatsApp and Telegram and different ways to connect. We will push for in-person meetings with workshops where we want students to collaborate, and and webinars that we can now connect to a lot more people. There is much more asynchronous. I think that there's definitely benefits of both. And the challenge for us is that we used to only have one option, which was the face-to-face. Now we have so many options. The challenge is to try and find the best ways to develop our pedagogy and develop our learning to suit and meet needs across those different channels. So my research looked at social configurations for learning, including communities and networks, which have always existed in face-to-face settings, but which increasingly now are existing online. And I looked also, when I examined those, I looked through the lens of social learning theories, such as network learning and connectivism. I think that I can see Maria said that they're struggling with hybrid teaching. And I can agree that it can be really challenging to blend the two, especially simultaneously. If you are trying to talk with people who are face-to-face in the room, but also make sure that you're connecting with and relating to those who are in the online space at the same time, that can be incredibly difficult. And I wonder if we need to start to think of better ways or different ways to achieve these goals, rather than try and make old ways work in new spaces and in new scenarios. So I guess the discussion that I wanted to focus on tonight is that concept of social learning, because when we're asking students to collaborate and we're asking students to work together, I think if we stop and ask ourselves, why are we setting these types of tasks? Why do we want students to collaborate and work together? Part of it is so that they can develop skills of social learning, because social learning is not only enhanced and stimulated through reaction, discussion, and argument, but also we get to confirm our knowledge. We get to make interpretations, contextualize, and validate. And this can only happen through interaction. But the type of interaction that we have now, if we are in the online space, is so different. How do we do these things? There's discussion and argument and interpretation and contextualization. How do we do this in this online space? I'd love to know what you think about whether or not these sorts of discussions and social learning can be achieved in the same way, or whether or not we need to come up with new ways to offer these opportunities for students. Any suggestions or ideas? An example is definitely right now. There's a silence and I feel so tempted to fill it because I don't have any sort of physical indications that people are thinking about the question and are working on it. I don't have any real physical indications if people are okay to answer and they're just thinking, or whether they're struggling to think, they don't understand what I'm asking. It's very difficult in this space scenario to do this sort of thing. Yeah, larger groups, we've got to find a new way. Use polls. Yes, definitely polls are fantastic. And learn what keeps working best for us. Shorter meetings, absolutely. Okay, hybrid group discussions work well. That's really interesting, Maria. I'd really like to know more about that, because I've found personally that I really struggle with those. Because when there are more people in Wagga, if there's a handful of people on Wagga campus and I'm meeting with them, I find that they tend to talk to each other and forget that I'm there, because I'm not really there.
But are you actually including yourself in the group discussions? I meant when I assign students to groups, some of them can be in the same room and some can be at a distance.
Okay.
And so that doesn't include me.
No, I just meant like my personal experience of having a discussion. Like if we have a meeting and there's 3 people sitting at a table in the same place and they've got the screen up there and I'm on the screen and I'm trying to talk to them as well, but they talk to each other and I can't hear them properly, or they're having jokes, and like Luciana was saying, the physical, they're nudging each other, and I miss all of that because I'm the one that's not physically there. And so I find that very difficult. So it's really great that you've had that success with students in that blended way. The right tools are important, yes. And discussion forums do feel very clumsy, especially in a time when we're very used to social media, which is, it seems much more conducive to talk somehow. I don't, and Alistair's asked, do we really need to meet in large synchronous meetings at all? I would like to say no. Not meetings, maybe learning opportunities like this, but not meetings. They're horrible. I would love to know who here likes those large meetings online, when there's like all of the faculty is having a meeting and everyone's online. I find them very difficult to maintain my focus and interest in. So let's get back to looking at social learning and looking at social learning in communities and networks. And communities and networks are really interesting when you look into them more closely, because we use the terms sometimes synonymously, but they are 2 different aspects of the same social fabric. And when we break them down, we can see that a community is generally developed around a shared interest or a passion or a goal. And although it may be formal or informal, people generally have a shared idea of, they want to advance knowledge about something that they all share an interest in. And therefore, they tend to create a sense of identity and a shared practice, ways of doing things, a shared language, a shared, all those sorts of things that are almost elements of a culture. Communities, even large communities, tend to be more tightly knit because people tend to know each other in communities, or tend to get to know each other because they want to work with each other to pursue this shared goal or shared interest. Whereas a network may be intentional, but it's often very serendipitous. And there's not usually a strong connection to a shared idea or domain or sustained engagement. People basically come into a network and take or offer what they need and then move away again. So a network can be seen as being a rich web of information sources, and it provides the potential for lots of exciting exploration because they can be very large and they can be full of lots of varied people or varied information sources. But because there's no collective intention or design, they're very loosely organized. And so it really depends much more on the individual to contribute and to filter and to take away something meaningful from the connections that are there. So even though we might use these two words, I noticed that with ONL, we talk about it being a community, but really a lot of the small groups that you work in are much more like communities, whereas the overarching group of everyone who is participating in the course is potentially closer to a network, because you've all come with your own intentions and all come with your own hopes for learning. While you're working in the smaller project-based learning group, it's much more about working together to respond to the scenario and to build each other's knowledge and get to know each other and work closely together, whereas the group as a whole is much more like a network. And so this takes me to this idea of whether or not all learning should be collaborative, or whether or not all learning should be social and that's the best way to go, or whether there are times and places for different types of learning, and whether or not we need to be aware of these and design for these, but not just design for them in the ways that we always have before, but design in new ways, considering that changes and the different tools and the different experiences that we now have with online as well as face-to-face experiences. So I know you had Dave White present earlier to you in the course, and I really think his work is so interesting and so useful. But when he posted this "Belonging is Inconvenient," which was a post that he made a couple of weeks ago, I was thinking, wow, I think he is reading my mind, because what he has posted here is really insightful about the ways that we can learn and the importance that we should place on all of the different modes of learning and how these can determine the different ways that we design for learning. So we often people see that I have researched personal learning networks and that I look at learning in community and social learning, and I think sometimes they think I think that is the only way or the best way to learn. And I don't actually think that. I think there is a time and a place for all of these. And the most insightful thing that I found from this post was that working and learning in community involves really hard work. It takes a lot of energy to connect and learn and work collaboratively with others. And I would love to know what you think. I think that working and learning collaboratively and socially in an online or digital space is even harder than when you are face-to-face, because you don't have all those social cues. You don't have all those physical indicators like Luciana suggested. You don't have it's very much, you feel like you're on the spot. We're looking at screens with people's faces, or we're looking at screens with just someone's name and we're not getting any sort of facial expression whatsoever. It's very different. So I would just like to know what you think. Do you think that we need to recognize the difficulty or the challenges that are involved in working and learning in a community, and that we may need to start to rethink the ways that we design learning opportunities for our students and for each other? it is a lot of information. Lots of people saying yes. And I say this as someone who actually feels more comfortable personally in an online setting than I do in a face-to-face setting. I feel quite confident and comfortable sitting talking with you here. I feel very relaxed and like I'm talking to a group of friends. But if I was standing in front of you in a room and you were all in front of me in person, I would be absolutely petrified. And that's just because of what I'm used to, I think. I think the other interesting thing about this is that not only does it recognize the hard work that community involves, it also recognizes, there's a couple of things. It also recognizes where he says collaborative learning is not about simply being together or in the same cohort, that it's something that needs to be worked on and developed. And we need to develop differentiated strategies, like Osman has said. That's exactly right. And sometimes we need to also look to networked learning as another way of learning that is equally social in many aspects, but that perhaps doesn't put the same pressures on us as learning in a community does. And I'm not saying that we throw out one or any of these or that we preference one or any. It's just that we need to perhaps consider all of these different ways of learning and consider them in new ways because we are in new spaces. And even when we come back to face-to-face, which is probably the familiar and what most people might prefer or be more experienced in, there will be some of us like myself who will feel quite overwhelmed by being in a space with lots of people where I can't pause and say, I'll get back to you on that, or quickly look something up on another screen, or there's a lot of different strategies that I've learnt that aren't at my disposal when I'm in a physical setting. So in order to understand, we can talk about how we need to change or how we might need to understand better the ways that we can learn more effectively or design learning more effectively in different spaces. But I think that it's also important that we look at the theoretical underpinnings of this to help us design learning opportunities based on something more than just our gut. Because I think that we have all shared, even tonight in these conversations, just how different our experiences are and just how different we all feel working in these different spaces. We do always learn from each other. That's true, Lotta. And I think that's really important too. And I think that's something that I've really benefited from through this type of learning, where I get to connect with this sort of learning that would not be possible for me in Brisbane, Australia, to connect with so many of you. So when we look through the theoretical lens, we look at network learning, connectivism, connected learning theories like this, which look at knowledge being distributed and socially constructed. I think this is really important that we understand that knowledge is distributed these days in the fact that there is so much information and so much to evaluate, to consider, that we can't possibly be the expert in a topic or a concept like perhaps we may have once thought we could be. Because things are, knowledge is developing so quickly, information has an increasingly short half-life. The fact that we can share and co-create is making knowledge, proliferate to such an extent that it is go beyond our own cognitive capabilities. Therefore, learning needs to be an active process that's driven by the learner. And I think we can all agree that when the learner has no personal motivation or personal interest or belief or desire to learn, then they're not going to be as effective as a learner as when they are really interested and really driven by their own desires. However, the learner is autonomous and driven by their own goals, that there's less opportunity for learning in community and more opportunity for learning through networks. And the role of social software and digital connections is to enable the connections and spaces for learning. And that's all that the technology is there for. The technology is there to enable the connections and the spaces for learning. The technology is not the learning. The technology shouldn't be driving the design of the learning. It should be simply a way to enable the learning to take place. Just reading, individualism may be a side effect of learning only digitally, without the possibility of experiencing others in their complexity. That's really interesting, Michaela. Thank you for sharing that. I hope that we are able to design learning that allows us to be a little more connected with each other, even though we may be individually separated through that online space. Because I know that I'm not suggesting we all put on our virtual reality gloves, our, what is it like, put on those gloves and you can feel things, and the goggles and all of that sort of thing. I'm not suggesting that, but I'm just wondering if we can continue to think and design and develop ways that we can connect with each other and be supportive and learn with and from each other, even though we may be physically separated. Because coming together in a physical space is increasingly problematic for a whole range of reasons, whether or not it's simply geographic distance, or whether it's because of pandemic, whether it's because of the costs of travel, financial costs, or it could be the costs and the impacts on the environment of travel. All of the flights that didn't take place during the past 2 years and how much better for the environment that was. I think it's important that we continue to try and develop different ways of seeing things so that we can still have face-to-face, but we can achieve something that's of relatively high quality in an online space. So there are definitely opportunities that suit the closed learning environment, and certainly opportunities that suit the open environment. I'm just reading here, catching up on some of these things. Being a teacher, I miss the opportunity to catch a question or chit chat in discussions. Online is less flexible, less feedback information from students. I think it can be less flexible, but in some ways it can be more, in the fact that you can have more channels, different opportunities to connect. People saying, are you happy, Alistair? I would consider Alistair a good friend of mine, and I've never met him in person before, and I'm not sure that we ever will. I mean, it's so far from Australia to Sweden. I would love to visit Sweden again sometime, and I would love if Alistair would have the opportunity to travel to Australia. I did it once. I went to Luleå, to the university there, to work with Oscar Gedda. And it was so exciting, and I loved Sweden so much. It did take 30 hours and it cost a lot of money just to get there. And that was just the very first step of the way. It was 3 different flights and, a lot of things that had to fall into place in order for that to come about. So I think, especially for someone, in Brisbane, Australia, the idea of being able to connect and learn with people from all over the world in this scenario, and to have discussions and build friendships with people who I may not actually get to meet in person, is a really important thing. So why would we want to encourage this sort of the capabilities that social learning and being able to learn in a community and learn in networked settings, why would we want to encourage that in our students? I think that encouraging connectedness in our students does enhance our students' learning outcomes, not necessarily and directly their content learning, but it does allow them to develop their knowledge through and their ability to put things into practice. Because if they are able to access the expertise of other practitioners more easily, they may become more employable as a result. For example, I know that because of COVID, our placements and our library visits have had to be moved virtually. There's been no other option for those students who are studying during this time. And traditionally, the study visits would involve going to 4 different locations and spending about an hour at each location, just different libraries, different GLAM, we call it GLAM. It's galleries, libraries, museums, archives. It's that whole sector. But since we needed to go online, the students have been able to do a study visit for the library that is housed in the Paris Opera House, which they never would have been able to do, and speak to the librarian of the Paris Opera House. They've been able to connect and speak with public librarians in Denmark and all over the world. So it is obviously, there are opportunities for them to build their networks and build their identity and undertake more opportunities for challenge, so that they can only do that when they meet people in that sort of more flexible setting. So I would just like to scroll through and give you some time to reflect, because we've had a really great chat, which is really good, and I'd much prefer for us to have had more extensive chat in the chat box than go through all the slides and just me race through all of this information. So Alistair is going to send you in a moment into breakout groups, and I'd really like it if you could take some time to discuss what we've talked about tonight and discuss your own experiences of learning either online or face-to-face in a community or network, whether you considered those as different settings, learning settings before, how you might encourage your students to undertake different styles of connecting, and whether or not you think that social learning theories would have any sort of influence on the ways that you plan your pedagogy and your teaching. So Alistair, are you right to move everyone into their groups?
Yes, we will do so. Also remind you before, in case we forget at the end, we will be coming back next week for a more open discussion webinar. So there'll be plenty more time for this, but I'll send you off for about 12 minutes to think about these things. So see you soon, and I'll pause the recording. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Time, of course, is always a question with these meetings, and we're nearly up. But to finish off, Kay.
Yeah, we'd love to know what you were discussing, and maybe what the main themes that you were all sharing with each other were. If you'd like to either jump on the mic or leave a comment in the chat. Oh, thank you, Lotta. I should have written it like that. Anyone wish to share?
Just.
Okay, I can start
yeah.
then.
Go
Yes,
for it.
if you don't mind. In our group, we had 3 participants. 2 had some experience, 1 a lot of experience, and 1 was like a beginner in this virtual setting, learning and teaching online. And we agreed that maybe teachers need exposure and experience as learners first to imagine how things can work for them, and then translate their own experience into this online teaching. Because for us, this was like a sudden, for many teachers, it was a sudden change. So you need some experience first to share it with your students. One idea. It's not a copy and paste thing. You cannot copy and paste your face-to-face experience and then do it online.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think having that experience as a learner is so valuable, because it does give us a different perspective and different ways of viewing the experience of learning online.
So this is what ONL gives us, our own personal experience.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And developing those skills as well of connecting and learning socially in a community and in a network. Any other comments, feedback?
I can say something. Group 7,
yes, for sure.
Just very short. We were 4 in the group, and the main thing is that we that we were saying is that it depends really on the subject, because there are disciplines that still is difficult to teach online because of, I mean, the discipline in itself and what you are teaching. So this requires an entire redesign of the discipline. It's not just, you know, the setting for the lecture, but there are like computer science. Some member of the group was were in computer science, and myself. So it's something to keep in mind, and also the critical approach to these kind of tools is not just, I mean, to adopt them, but it's very important to acknowledge that there are pros and cons, as always. I mean, so that's the two main things that we have been discussing. Thank you.
Yeah, really interesting, and it is. I think a lot of learning, a lot of courses, a lot of disciplines. We do need to rethink how we approach and how we connect and design pedagogy, because this is a new space, and it requires those new ways of thinking. Definitely. Well, it is 8 o'clock. Well, 8 o'clock here for me, 8 p.m. Alistair, we're going to meet again next week. Is that correct?
Yep, next Tuesday, the 26th, at and the usual time zone difficulties at 9 o'clock Central European summertime, which is a little earlier than usual, but it fits with your schedule, Kay.
Yeah, thank you for that.
So it's fairly late afternoon for Singapore, and otherwise it's morning. Hopefully more you can come back then, and maybe some more people can come back, but we'll be looking further at personal learning networks with Kay's experience from that. But most importantly, this webinar, as we did in topic 2, will be giving you longer time in mixed groups of PBL groups, so that you speak with each other, where you can exchange ideas about how you're working with this topic, thinking a bit more about networked learning in general. As I suggested in the chat, while during the week, you could maybe at a spare moment in your life, try and write down a map of all your own networks and communities, and how do they link together, and how broad is it? It's an interesting activity. I've done it a few times. Otherwise, we will say thank you for coming today. Thanks to Kay for inspiration and kicking off the topic. Now you get back to your PBL groups and get busy with this topic. And there's much more on the website. And this recording will be posted later today for those who couldn't be with us just now.
Thank you, everyone. It was lovely to meet you all and speak with you all. Have a lovely day.